show. It's time to stop just surviving, and it's time to begin to thrive. It's time to live happier and healthier. Turn stress into strength. Noted author Debbie Mandel will show you how to move beyond personal doubts and fears and into positive perception to turn on your inner light. Here's your host, Debbie Mandel.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to my show. Our guest expert is Dennis Tirch, Ph.D., the Associate Director of the American Institute for Cognitive Therapy in Manhattan, founder and director of the Center for Mindfulness and Compassion-Focused Cognitive Behavioral Therapy, and the co-author of Overcoming Anxiety. Welcome, Dennis.
Thanks for having me, Debbie.
Now, Dennis, what is the root cause of anxiety? I mean, I haven't met a person on the planet, especially in New York, who isn't anxious.
Well, the root cause of anxiety, if we really kind of give it a little thought, is actually survival, because anxiety represents our ability or evolved capacity to detect threats in our environment and respond to those threats. So it's actually a very important part of being alive, is to experience some form of anxiety.
Now, it sounds a lot like stress. So is stress a trigger for anxiety, or are they interchangeable terms?
Well, you know, the way people use the word stress, you know, in our everyday language, you know, often people will use the terms stress and anxiety similarly. Stress, actually, one way to think about it is it's the relationship of the demands in your environment with your ability that you perceive to meet those demands. So the more demanding an environment is, the more potentially threatening an environment is. We have this experience of stress, and anxiety can be a part of that. I mean, other emotions can be too, excitement or, drive, but anxiety is certainly related to the stress response.
Is a certain amount of anxiety needed to perform better?
I don't know if it's absolutely needed for everyone all the time, but there is research that suggests that people will perform better when they have a manageable level of anxiety, a little bit of anxious arousal for certain tasks, like, you know, public speaking or taking a test. A certain amount of anxiety focuses the attention and activates us. When the anxiety is too much, the behavioral kind of range of options gets a little too narrow, and we sort of wind up not really being at our best.
Now, what are the symptoms of anxiety? I want to know if I have it.
Well, I think we all, as you say, all have some anxiety some of the time. When anxiety becomes problematic, it can show up in a lot of different ways, and that's because our evolved capacity to detect threats in the environment involves lots of different systems. So it involves our bodies, and it involves anxious arousal. So for some people, problem levels of anxiety might show up as panic attacks, where physical symptoms become very distressing and the heart races, and nausea perhaps. And other sort of thinking symptoms of anxiety turn up in worries and what-ifing and sort of projecting into the future and imagining all sorts of dreadful things that could go wrong. And for other people, there might be re-experiencing of a trauma that was very threatening. That's part of the anxiety response. And of course, we've heard about OCD, obsessive-compulsive disorder, where people develop rituals or thoughts that just won't, kind of go away. So there's a wide range of ways that anxiety can show up.
So with that, are there different kinds? So there are varying symptoms, is what you're saying. It's almost like my weakest link might be the manifestation of when I'm anxious. But are there different kinds of anxieties?
Well, I think there's different ways that anxiety expresses itself. It's a sort of one of the ways to think about anxiety is the difference between anxiety and fear. Fear is a term that we'll use for an imminent danger that we're responding to as a real danger. So if there was a fire alarm went off and I felt the door in my office and it felt warm, well, then we'd be dealing more with fear than anxiety. And anxiety is sort of forecasting and getting sort of anxious arousal about things that aren't so imminent. And this is distinctively human. One of the points about that, there's a book that came out, you may have heard of it, called Why Zebras Don't Have Ulcers. Mm-hmm. And it's a sort of a wonderful little mnemonic to think about how anxiety shows up. Because if I were a zebra and I was sort of alone at the watering hole and a lion almost ate me and I just narrowly escaped, well, within about 10 minutes, my anxious arousal, my sense of fear would be dissipated and I'd be back to baseline. But humans have this very finely tuned, anxious brain, but we also have this human sort of recently developed brain on top of it, our prefrontal cortex, and we're always kind of thinking and planning and ruminating. So if a zebra had a brain like a human, the zebra would be maybe waking up in the middle of the night thinking about, will the lion be there tomorrow? Am I a good enough zebra? Should I have been a giraffe? There's all sorts of worries that we concoct and get stuck in these loops between our emotional brain and our thinking brain. That's a big part of what we're working with.
And I think when we experience something terrifying, it really gets lodged in the hippocampus, especially if we sleep on it. It becomes subconscious almost, doesn't it?
Yeah, actually, a lot of processing around anxiety relates to non-conscious processing. You're spot on there. And what we find, what we refer to in compassion-focused therapy, is the presence of emotional memories. So my entire learning history, I'm going to be developing memories that are distributed throughout my nervous system, distributed through the body, and can be triggered by all sorts of experiences, and I might not really even be aware that what the source of this emotion is. So if I've had, for example, difficult experiences with caregivers or with parents or teachers, I may find myself in situations that evoke that emotional memory without me really being aware of what's triggering this anxiety experience.
Especially if some of those triggers happen before the age of 5, when your memory might not just have been that active, or as an infant, and you have terrors that haunt you throughout life. So I think that we have to touch on how to deal with the things that is not within our ken. Well, we go to commercial break, and we will return with Dr. Dennis Tirch, author of Overcoming Anxiety.
Now you can take Debbie Mandel home with you. Her book, Turn On Your Inner Life, Fitness for Body, Mind, and Soul, will help you decompress with healthy, positive, concrete solutions. Common life challenges are presented so that you can quickly find the help you need. Emotional tips, original meditations, and a fun and easy-to-follow fitness workout for each mindset. This revolutionary new method will help you rewire mind and body to take back your power. Get it on Amazon.
Are you overwhelmed with the burden of taking care of children, parents, or both? Are you taking care of everyone else except yourself? It's time to change your habits and re-energize. Debbie Mandel gives you an innovative and easy-to-follow program for good health and happiness. In her magical new book, Changing Habits, the Caregiver's Total Workout, Debbie Mandel shows you step-by-step how to find the optimal balance between giving and receiving, and guides you to exercise and eat right to take care of yourself. What are you waiting for? Read Changing Habits and start training for your life. Life does not need to be a burden. Get Changing Habits, the Caregiver's Total Workout, on Amazon.
You're listening to the Turn On Your Inner Life show. I'm your host, Debbie Mandel, and I'm speaking with Dr. Dennis Tirch, author of Overcoming Anxiety. Dennis, I need to know, what's the difference between the cognitive approach and the compassionate approach to ridding the self or putting it in context, this anxiety?
Well, I'm very glad that you asked that, because they're related, and they're related in terms of their history, but they're also distinct. So cognitive and cognitive behavioral therapies, one of the distinctive features of those therapies is that they have emerged from research, and that there's process and outcome research which kind of supports that approach. Compassion-focused therapy was originally created and founded by Dr. Paul Gilbert in the UK, who was a cognitive behavioral therapist who was specifically working with shame-based difficulties. And one of the things that you do in cognitive therapy is to challenge the thoughts, particularly the maybe pain-inducing or less than functional patterns of thinking that people have. What Paul noticed, which also a lot of other folks noticed in the world of cognitive behavioral therapy, is that while there's utility to that, there's other sort of very important avenues that can help people deal with their anxiety. Compassion-focused therapy draws on cognitive therapy, it draws on research in neuroscience and evolutionary psychology, and it also involves elements taken from Buddhist meditation, all of which emphasize the deliberate training of the mind in the experience of compassion, which is a sense of sensitivity to suffering in ourselves and in others, and a desire to alleviate that suffering. What we find is that, and there's a great deal of research, mounting research, that the experience of compassion, particularly self-compassion, actually helps us to regulate anxiety, and it affects us in many, many positive ways. It has a positive effect on the immune system, a positive effect on reducing our experience levels of stress and depression. So it's a sort of a very worthwhile endeavor to train ourselves in compassion and cultivate this in order to live healthier lives.
Well, with the emphasis on self-compassion, the hardest person to have compassion is for the self. We're great with friends and strangers, but how do I really, in the throes of, let's say, a panic attack or having dreadful anxiety, have compassion for the self? Do I tell myself a good story? How does it work?
Well, this is very important. One of the things that's particularly different about compassion-focused therapy is that compassion and self-compassion is related to our experience of kindness, and the same sort of kindness that we experience from our caregivers. And we know that from the day we're born and throughout our lives, our experience of support, helpfulness, warmth, and kindness will affect our brain's functioning and even the development and maturation of our brains and bodies. So we've evolved to respond to this warmth and this kindness, and in fact, it affects our thinking, it affects our behavior, and it affects many, many levels of our functioning. So in compassion-focused therapy, we have specific skills and specific work to use imagery, cultivating an image of an ideal compassionate other, for example, and focusing on that image the way we might, if I started talking about our favorite food, or you might become hungry just thinking about that food, or if we discussed a very frightening image, you might become afraid, even though it's not really there. Our experience of imagery can affect our bodies and our thoughts and our actions. So you can use the same sort of logic with compassionate imagery, and this is something that people have known in Buddhism and in the inner traditions of many religions for many, many years. So what we basically learn is to train the mind in activating our safeness system, our soothing system, and our self-compassion. And when you've learned that, you can bring that into contact with your anxiety, not suppressing the anxiety, having a willingness to feel it, having a willingness to be present with your anxiety. And in this way, compassion actually results in courage, and a greater ability to face challenges and face fears and overcome the influence they have on our behavior.
So are you asking me to helicopter over the self, let's say, when I feel anxious, observe it, and then comment about it?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. What we notice is that there's actually the concept of self is a very interesting one, because there are many different selves in a way. I mean, not literally, but there's many different ways that we experience ourselves. So if I'm in the middle of sort of a really, really frightening situation, there's going to be different thoughts, different memories, different ideas are going to come up, and I'm going to be a very different self than I might be if I'm, with loved ones and in a safe, warm sort of environment, or the self that might show up if I just found out that I won the lottery or something like that. That's going to be a very different self. So this idea that you mentioned of helicoptering over the self sort of refers to this present moment awareness that shows up in mindfulness traditions, paying attention in the present moment, to the present moment, and sort of observing what self is really showing up. And then from there, deliberately evoking our experience of warmth, kindness, and support towards ourselves.
What if you don't have experience with that? What if your inner critic has been so potent and you've had teachers that were very critical, as many people have? Some people are a little more sensitive and had parents that were tough from the child's perspective. How do I develop this self-compassion or this perspective over myself if I don't have much in reserve? But hold that thought. We're going to commercial break and then come right back with this answer.
Okay.
And we return with Dr. Dennis Tirch, Overcoming Anxiety. Dear listeners, I'm excited to tell you about my new book, Addicted to Stress. This is the message you need to hear. Are you addicted to stress? Do you do it all while everyone depends on you? Where's all this pressure coming from? It is coming from inside you. This is why my publisher, John Wiley, asked me to write Addicted to Stress, a woman's 7-step program to reclaim joy and spontaneity in life. This fun-to-read book teaches proven strategies to reclaim your life, silence your inner critic, build a healthy body, and reframe your thoughts to change your life for the better. Dare to be happy without the guilt. Addicted to Stress is easy to get. It's available at Barnes & Noble and other fine bookstores everywhere. You can also buy it at Amazon and other online retailers. We're back with Dr. Dennis Tirch, author of Overcoming Anxiety. Okay, so I don't have it in reserve. What do I do?
Well, this is actually one of the central kind of things we'll find when we're doing this sort of therapy, and in fact in any therapy, because if part of how we deal with anxiety, if one of the major ways we learn and have evolved to cope is through warmth, kindness, and support, and if our relationships with support of others, with attachment figures in our lives have been maybe painful, maybe in some cases traumatic, there's going to be very natural blocks to the experience of compassion. And in fact, the experience of warmth itself and loving relationships can be very anxiety-provoking if that's part of our learning history. So what we aim to do is to gradually, in a challenging but not overwhelming way, train ourselves, train our clients, train the mind to experience this compassion and mindfulness and acceptance. And it takes time, and it takes a sort of a systematic approach. And just the way you might have gradual exposure to, say, fear of heights in behavior therapy, where, maybe week one, this is the way we used to do this in behavior therapy, was actually with a tape measure, you'd like week 1 you're 8 feet away from the window, and then each day you're getting a little bit closer and learning to relax into the experience. Similarly, there's a gradual exposure to compassion and self-soothing itself, so that eventually people can kind of have this capacity grow. And the brain responds to this. We know from the research in neuroimaging research on neuroplasticity that as we develop compassion, as new connections and new sort of brain development actually takes place.
Now that's very encouraging, and I'm going to ask you this. Can we prevent anxiety in the first place? It's always easier to prevent disease or dis-ease than to treat it.
Well, this is very interesting, actually. The metaphor of disease and human emotional suffering is the basis of most mental health, but it's also a tricky metaphor because, if there's an absence of germs or bacteria or bacterial infection or viral infections or disease in the body, then that means we have a healthy person. And unfortunately, that's carried over into psychiatry and psychology to where there's this sense in a lot of the popular culture, not everyone, that if we're free from negative emotions, even the term negative emotions, if we're free from sadness, we're free from anxiety, that means we're healthy. So we kind of move towards this happy face button sometimes in popular culture, a model of what happiness really is. But actually, it's, as we know, as you know, human suffering is a natural part of life. Anxiety is a natural part of life. And when we aim to completely suppress it, it actually gets stronger. It's got to do with the nature of learning. If we sort of tried to not think of a purple Volkswagen for the next 5 minutes, that'd be the only thing popping through our minds. But if we just kind of remained open to whatever went through our minds, all sorts of things might move through. So creating conditions in your life to minimize and deal with stress better, that's wonderful. And, trying to not, meet trouble halfway, not going out and deliberately putting yourself into terrifying situations, that's a cool idea. But coming to terms with the fact that anxiety is a part of life and having a warm, accepting attitude towards anxiety paradoxically reduces the amount of an influence anxiety has over us, and in some cases just reduces the amount of anxiety we experience.
With that concept, I know you wrote a lot about meditation in the book, and I think that's part of the mindfulness process. It would be wonderful if we could have a course in that in school for our children.
This is really, really important, actually. And one of the things that hopefully we move towards is to have a more compassionate and mindful society. I think it's kind of amazing that we don't teach children more about how to be with their emotional experience, how to kind of settle into and relax into the experience of anxiety. We have so little training in how to deal with difficult emotions in schools, and so much money spent on medication and therapy sort of after the fact. And I think you're really onto something very
That's
important.
a great way to conclude our segment, and that would generate focus and being alive and alert, and we could have a whole show on that. Well, you have been a very relaxing and calming guest. How can we learn more about your work?
Well, the website mindfulcompassion.com has information about my work and my practice, and some meditation exercises that you can listen to there on the website. And of course, the book kind of lays out the whole CFT program for anxiety, and that's available, online retailers like Amazon and such.
I urge everyone to read it because it's just a wonderful way to kind of settle into life being a series of recoveries. Well, be well.
Thanks very much. I'm really happy to be here.
Affirmation of the week. Are you so ingrained in a habit that you overlook a valuable anomaly? Now for the latest medical trends. Gum disease is not only 4 times as common among patients with the autoimmune disease rheumatoid arthritis as it is among their healthy peers, but it also tends to be more severe, which is indicated in a study published in the Annals of Rheumatic Diseases. Almost half of adults with type 2 diabetes report acute and chronic pain, and close to 1/4 report neuropathy, fatigue, depression, sleep disturbance, and physical or emotional disability, according to a study of more than 13,000 adults from the University of California. While many public health officials and healthcare providers view reducing sodium intake as the primary strategy to lower blood pressure, a roundtable indicates that strategies that encourage lifestyle modifications would yield better results, according to the journal Nutrition. That includes exercise and eating right. Summer can mean more than just an increase in temperatures, humidity, and outdoor physical activity. It can mean an increase of kidney stones, which affect approximately 3.8 million people in the U.S. and are on the rise. In the heat, we might not be drinking as much as we should, or taking in the right types of fluids, so we become dehydrated, which can lead to a production of more stones. So pay attention to proper hydration. And prescribing calcium and vitamin D supplements for men at risk of bone loss from hormonal treatment for prostate cancer seems like good medicine from Wake Forest Medical Center. Well, we come to the close of another show. I have an educational website totally free, turnonyourinnerlight.com. All the radio shows with the guest experts are archived for your listening pleasure. Just click on the show that you want and you go right into YouTube. Subscribe to my free newsletter for the latest radio show delivered email directly to you, along with a fresh new article on stress management and all the health tips that I didn't get to say on radio, fully delineated on turnonyourinnerlight.com. Have a wonderful week and see you on the radio.